Welcome everybody to tonight's program with L'Dor Va-Dor. We're so thrilled to have Scott Greenberg back with us tonight. He was with us a few weeks ago and spoke about the pandemic and how it's affecting all of us and what we can do to keep busy and not get into being depressed. And I thought this would be something a little bit on the lighter scale. Scott and his wife took a trip around the world, and he's going to share some of what he found and what he saw with us, and I'm thrilled to have him. And without any further ado, I'm going to put Scott on the video. So
there you go. Thank you. So nice to see everybody. I wanted to start with L'Chaim because frankly, almost every night we started the night with L'Chaim. So I will tell you, 85 days that we went around the world. Sharon, if you could put the map up, I can show people where we started, and it's coming up. So we started, if you look on the right of your screen, this is kind of a perfect Hebrew textbook, right? We start on the right. We started from Los Angeles. We started actually on Irene's birthday on January 13th. And over the next 85 days, we traveled west around the world. And for the most part, and this is one of the reasons that we took this cruise, it was the Southern Hemisphere. Most of us have traveled more Northern Hemisphere, either through the United States, Canada, Alaska. A lot of us have taken Alaska cruise. We go to Europe. Maybe we've done the Baltics. Even the Orient is mostly Northern Hemisphere, but the Southern Hemisphere had particular appeal to us. So it was, I said, 85 days. And if we go to the next slide, I will say that this was a bucket list trip. We had talked about doing this for years and years. We were on the Crystal Serenity, and if anybody has ever sailed on Crystal, they talk about the world cruise almost everywhere you go. And I had been on Crystal. We did a Baltics cruise and we did a transatlantic cruise with them. And of course, they talk so much about the world cruise. It was something we always wanted to do. When we originally wanted to do it, we planned it a few years earlier, but my daughter thought she might be pregnant, and as most of you can understand, there was no way we could be away when she had her first granddaughter. So we had another itinerary originally planned, but we kept looking for one that appealed to us, and this appealed to us particularly. I will say, if anybody has questions along the way, type it into the chat room. I'll try my best to respond as we go. But in any event, if we go to the next slide, there's a picture of the ship. So people ask me about the size of the ship. It was about 1,000 people. It's actually 990 people. The other thing is that most people think an around the world cruise, everybody on that cruise goes around the world. And nothing could be further from the truth. Only about 1/3 of the ship is made up of world cruisers. It is actually in this case, 4 segments back to back, each here 3 weeks long. Every 3 weeks, an entirely new group of people come on. Now, yes, some people go for one, some people go for 2 segments, some people go for 3. But only about 300, and I think on this about 320 or 330 went for the full cruise. When we began, the first night on the cruise is reserved entirely for world cruisers. So we got picked up at our hotel in Los Angeles by a limousine devoted to us, dedicated to us. They handled our luggage. Truthfully, we never touched a thing from the hotel to the boat or to the ship. I guess it's not a boat, it's a ship. Anyway, it's a ship, and we got on the ship, And so we got to meet and tour the ship alone before everybody else came on. So it was a bucket list cruise. Crystal, if you don't know Crystal, it's an extremely high-end cruise line along the lines of some of the others that you know. So the next slide is really the top 5 questions that we got. We get lots more questions, and I hope I get some from you, and I will answer. But the first question everybody asks is, how much weight did you gain? All right? You're on a ship for 85 days, and you kind of need to think about this a little differently. When you get on a Caribbean cruise ship where every island is the same, when you leave at night, they turn the side around and you go back, and it's the same ship. This ship is different. This cruise is different. Everywhere we're going is someplace no one's ever been before, or most people had not been before. So we actually lost weight over 85 days. We lost about 5 pounds each. I'm going to talk a lot about the enrichment lectures, but one of the enrichment lecturers, I don't remember which segment he was on, was a physician from the Space Coast, a cardiologist. And he said the average person on a Caribbean 7-day or 10-day cruise will gain somewhere between 7 and 10 pounds. But each successive week begins to bring that down. And the average person on a round the world cruise will only gain 2 pounds. And the reason for that is all that food's in front of you every day for 85 days. You don't need to take advantage of it because it will be there tomorrow. I promise you, it will be there tomorrow. And then you have to pace yourselves, which we did a pretty good job of. Because as I said, we lost 5 pounds each. Now there is the main dining room, and there is open seating, so you don't need to make a reservation. But there were 5 specialty restaurants on board, and those you needed reservations for. There was a sushi restaurant which was operated by Nobu. If those of you who know Nobu know, it's very high-end sushi. And honestly, you kind of couldn't figure out how they could do it so well, but they did. There was an Italian restaurant. There was a Chinese restaurant. There was a Brazilian steakhouse, and I'm forgetting the 5th, but it'll come back to me. And there were there. But so the traditional buffet that you get on most of the cruise ships that we've all been on, if we've been on those cruise ships, most of those buffets didn't really exist except for breakfast. There were lunch buffets, but there. Now our schedule, we typically only tried to eat 2 real meals, and we snacked in the middle of the day. So the next question I get a lot of, oh, by the way, can we go to the next slide? I missed that. There you go. So I just, those top 2 pictures there, that was the first Sunday buffet, which was very enticing, very hard to avoid, but spectacularly presented. And again, I will tell you, Crystal is kind of known for its food. So, but the other thing is, if we go to the next slide, the question I get asked often is, what did you do all day? All right, because we were 85 days, we had 42 sea days. So we had 42 ports and 42 sea days. So you would wonder what could possibly keep you busy for 42 days. One of the things that on Crystal, and I don't know about other world cruises, but one of the things on Crystal is they do an incredible job of developing an enrichment program. So they had speakers on each segment that would do various lectures. There was typically one at 10 in the morning, then it would go 45 minutes or an hour, then there was one at 11:15, it would go 45 minutes or an hour, and then there was one at 1 o'clock. We had some pretty famous people on this ship. One of the ones that you might know, Gene Robinson, who's on MSNBC, he was on one segment. He was a very interesting guy. But a fellow from Newsweek, who was the editor of Newsweek, he had been the Washington chief editor for 50 years. He worked with 5 different presidents during that period of time. On one of the segments, I had the minority leader, this was in Africa, we had a minority leader of the opposition party when Nelson Mandela became president of South Africa. So he was the opposition party, a nice Jewish boy, I might say. He was a very interesting guy. But it wasn't exclusively that. As I said, we had a cardiologist on, we had a marriage counselor on, which goes really to the next question, or one of the later questions, which is how you didn't kill each other. We had a 4-star general who had been a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. We had conservatives, Republicans. We had liberal Democrats. We had adventurers. There was one guy on who recreated cruises from the earliest of time. He duplicated a cruise that is believed to be the first cruise to have landed in the United States or in North America from Scotland, and he did it in a leather boat that he built himself to spec, and he filmed it all across the Atlantic through some very difficult times. It was amazing. He also duplicated one of the Sinbad cruises. He was interesting. The cardiologist did 6 different lectures on various health issues. The nice thing about all of these lecturers were they were accessible because they were on the ship. They didn't go home at night, right? So they were there. So you got to talk to them. So I got to ask, for instance, the guy who had taken 5, had been there for 5 presidents. He talked about leaks in Washington on one of his lectures, and I asked him who his biggest source was, and it happened to have been George Bush Jr., the 43, when 45 was president. That was one of his biggest sources, and that was really interesting. I also asked him who the smartest president was and who the dumbest was, and his answers were really, really interesting. I would have thought that Jimmy Carter would have been one of the smartest because he was the nuclear scientist. It turned out he was perceived to be one of the least intelligent, not because he wasn't book smart, but because he knew nothing about politics in DC. And one of the smartest or most underestimated was Bush 43. So it's really interesting. That was very interesting. So, but in addition to that, my wife found a Mahjong game. She played Mahjong on every sea day and made great friends. There was a casino on board. That was both good and bad. It was good because it gave me something to do. It was bad because it gave me something to do. And that was a challenge. But there were interesting people there. I sat next to a fellow. For some reason, we seemed to end up at the casino at the same time every day. And we were just playing at a $5 table. We weren't betting a lot of money. We were sitting at a $5 table, but I could tell he was still working. And so one day I leaned over to him and I asked him what he did for a living. And he was the chairman of Starbucks. And he was an unbelievably fascinating guy. Not Howard Schultz, who is the founder of Starbucks, but we were on the ship together when Howard Schultz announced that he might be running for president. And that was clearly a very busy day for him. He didn't spend as much time at the casino that day as he did others. There was a movie theater on board. We saw first-run movies almost every day. When I say we, mostly me. Irene was playing Mahjong, but I would go to the movies with fresh popcorn. A lot of first-run movies. We saw some of the movies that were up for the Academy Award that year. And then there were shows. The entertainment was amazing. They brought Broadway performers on, a lot of West End from Britain. They were on. I saw a rendition of some Broadway music. I'm a Les Mis fan. I saw a guy from Italy do the best performance of Let Him Live I had ever seen. Some of it was astounding. And then their cast, their regular onboard cast was really equally amazing. They did the Irish dancing, I forget what you call that, the tapping of the toe. And one of those guys had been the lead on Broadway when that came up. So there were shows every night. There was the casino, there was mahjong, there were lectures, there was a fitness center. I went to the gym. I actually had broke my shoulder 3 months before I got on the ship. So I was still in recovery and I had to go to the gym. I went to the gym every day and I was working on that. So if we go to the next slide, the next question I get asked all the time, did we miss one? Yeah, we missed one, I think. If we go back, one more back. No, I guess we missed the one. Okay, keep going forward. The question was, how do you pack all day? And there is a slide for that, but I don't see it. Okay, how do you pack for 85 days away? So 7 suitcases and everything we owned and then some, all unnecessary, all unnecessary. The truth is, when you go on a ship like this or a cruise like this, you really only need to pack for 2 weeks because there's a laundry on every floor, so you can do your own laundry. That has evolved. Going forward, they're going to do the laundry for you. But there was laundry. It was free. You could do as much laundry as you wanted. And they also had a dry cleaners. So we brought enough clothes, a lot more clothes than we really needed, but didn't use it all. For example, one of the things people always ask us is, do you spend a lot of time at the pool? I spent exactly 3 hours at the pool in 85 days. 3 hours total. So because there was no need, we were literally that busy that we didn't have any time to go sit by the pool. And while I don't love the pool, my wife does. And she had purchased bathing suits to come, and 3 of the 4 that she purchased came back with the tags on. So we never sat at the pool. But the service level is remarkable there. And at the pool, we never fought for chairs. You didn't have to reserve chairs if you wanted to. We might sit up there in our clothes waiting for one of the restaurants to open or to have a drink or to listen to some music, but it wasn't really necessary. So going back to clothes, Crystal still has a dress code. So we would have to get dressed every couple of nights and I'd have to put a jacket on, and Irene would have to wear a sports outfit, not a dress per se, but certainly nice clothes. So that was kind of interesting. So you did change 3 times a day, but even then, because they had laundry facilities on, it was kind of easy to do. So the next question I get asked all the time is how did you not kill each other? Because we did not have a suite. We had just a small cabin. I didn't even have a cabin with a balcony. I don't do well sitting on the balcony while we're sailing, and since there were 42 sea days, there were at least 42 days I didn't care. So we just had a big picture window. We had a pretty small cabin, but the toilets or the bathrooms on Crystal have 2 sinks, a full shower, and a full bath. So they were very accommodating. It was great. And all of the staff is on for the whole time you're there. So they get to know you pretty well. We didn't kill each other because we went our separate ways at times during the day, but we'd come back every afternoon. We'd meet some people, we'd have a drink. That's another question I get asked often. Did you make a lot of friends? Did you meet a lot of people there? And while this may sound not nice, the reality is we didn't try to make a lot of friends. We didn't want to get trapped and beholden to another couple that we had to be with on a regular basis or more often than you might think. So we did meet a couple that we would meet every day for a drink at 5 o'clock, just like this. And we would sit there, and at 6 o'clock, we would go in to dinner ourselves. They'd go to one table, we'd go to another. Everybody kind of wanted to be friendly, but not friends. So we made a couple of friends that we spent more time with than most. We have visited one in Las Vegas. We have stayed very friendly with, I do anyway, with a fellow in Seattle. And then we met a nurse who lives in Palm Springs, California, and we stayed pretty connected to her. She was Irene's mahjong friend. So we had enough time together. We had enough time apart. It was really kind of very interesting. The truth is, we look forward to spending time together when it was appropriate. And then I need to add that every time we went to a particular port, if you look at the map at all when we went by, and I'll go through some of them in a minute, all of those ports were ports that you look forward to. So we didn't go to a port to go to their beach. We didn't go to their port to go look at another store. We went to some pretty interesting places. Kiribati, for example. Kiribati is an island chain in the middle of the Pacific, and we went there on our way to American Samoa after we left Hawaii. Kiribati is a small country, pretty much at sea level. I'm glad we got there because as the sea is rising, it won't be there in about 5 years. They've actually purchased land in Fiji to move their entire population there. They had virtually no electricity. Everybody was living in huts. It was really quite fascinating. So that's not the kind of place where you walk off and you look at a Diamonds International and see if anything's on sale that day. So it's a pretty interesting piece. So if we can go, as I said, we visited 42 ports. Some of these are up here. We went to Jacob's Ladder. I actually walked down Jacob's Ladder, 700 steps, or 699, or 799. That was a really interesting thing. I almost didn't make it. Walking down was actually walking harder than walking up. I went to Napoleon's tomb, which was in, where was that? St. Helena. There's not much to see in St. Helena, which is why Napoleon's tomb has a lot of things except Napoleon. He's not there. He was smart enough to have been moved. Of course, we went to Sydney and Melbourne and a couple of other places. So what was our favorite port? I don't have a favorite port. If you go through a couple of more slides. So you see here, we were in Fremantle, we were in Cape Town. Cape Town is a fascinating place. Kangaroo Island, probably one of our favorite ports. Kangaroo Island was really fascinating. Our guide there was a cross between Crocodile Dundee and Groucho Marx. She was hysterical, but she knew every inch of the land. By the way, Kangaroo Island, after we were there, was virtually destroyed by fire last year. There's very little of it left. I'm glad that we got there when we did. If we can go to the next slide, it'll pick up a couple of things for me. As you can see, I'm there holding a snake in the middle of Walvis Bay, which is in, I forget what country that is in, Namibia, right in Namibia. The sand dunes in Namibia have taken 42,000 years to build. They're Lawrence of Arabia-like sand dunes, but the ship did an amazing job of recreating a Star Wars theme out there, and they had all sorts of people in the middle of this desert, including a snake charmer, so that's where that snake comes from. And of course, we also went to Barcelona, and we ended in Monte Carlo. So when you ask what the favorite ports are, it's really hard to narrow that down because you dealt with different cultures, you dealt with wealth and poverty, the likes of which you can't possibly understand. It's not poverty like we see here. The average income may be $70 a month in these places. We were in Namibia and we visited a township, and you know the word township from South Africa, but the township in Namibia there was no running water. There were the toilets for streets were, if they weren't in the middle of the street, were community toilets. We went into a women's center and I met a young girl there and I started to talk to her and she asked if we were from the States and I of course said yes. And she had just graduated as valedictorian of her high school class, which in and of itself is astounding because of the poverty that was there. And she had just gotten a full scholarship to the University of Pittsburgh. And she was on her way to Pittsburgh. And what a change in her life was coming. We met religious cultures. We traveled, of course, on Sundays. We were in Madagascar on a Sunday, and you can't get any poorer than Madagascar, but they all got dressed up for church on Sunday morning. It was amazing. And of course, when we got to Monte Carlo, parked next to our ship was a Russian oligarch who was Putin's best friend. And so his ship that was about 200 feet long. It was astounding. Religion plays a big part when you travel around the world. Religion is different, but we saw the largest Hindu temple in the Southern Hemisphere, which was up in the right-hand corner of the picture that's there. It's amazingly beautiful. You can't begin to appreciate it. So you saw architecture, you saw landscape, you saw wealth, you saw poverty, you saw culture, you saw religion, you had the enrichment lectures on board. I mean, the truth is, there was no shortage of places. We went to Robins Island off of South Africa, which is where Mandela was kept for a long time. And when you tour Robins Island in South Africa, you are toured by a former prisoner who was imprisoned there. And it adds an entirely new meaning to what Mandela's life was like there. The Sydney Opera House, we happened to have been there on a day they were rehearsing. Nobody in the opera house, but we managed to be there when they were rehearsing. It was I don't know how to say this other than it was an emotionally moving day. If we go to the next slide, I'm trying to look at some of the other things that were here. Oh, there you go. That's how I packed. That's what we left with, and that's what we came home with. I knew that was there for a while. But let's go to the next slide. So that was some of the activity. As you can see, we had a lot of these photos because we did a lot of this. So we saw the wealth in Hawaii, the wealth in Monte Carlo. We saw, we went to Nez, I think it's Nez, outside of Monte Carlo. Lunch at Nez was $240 a couple. We went with another couple, $240 a couple, plus we took a limo up there. And not 3 days before, we were at a place where the average income, as I said, was $70 a month. So you can't pick a favorite in this. So you have to be open to all of those ideas. It's a fascinating trip that I can talk about forever, but I'd love to see if there are any questions. Does anybody have any questions for me? I'm happy to pause, although I can keep talking if you want. Anybody have any questions? Come on, there must be a question or two. Has anybody thought about going on a world cruise? Has anybody else gone on a world cruise? Yeah. So another question I get asked all the time is, would you go again? And I will tell you that midway through our cruise, the answer was no. We would never go again. It was being away for far too long, missed our families. And by the end of the cruise, we signed up for 2022. And we're going not for 85 days this time, but for 118 days. So we're going to go for 4 months. We're going to go on that cruise from Miami to Miami. We're going to end up going through both canals on that particular cruise, and we're going to go to parts of the world we have never been. We didn't want to do 2021, and I guess in hindsight, I'm glad that we didn't. But we are going to do 2 legs of 2021. We're going to do parts of China, Japan, Taiwan, South Korea. We're going to do that. Crystal, everywhere at Crystal was everywhere at Crystal. Crystal service is kind of second to none. I used to say they must have pictures of all of us down there, because you're not on the ship for more than a day or so before everybody starts calling you Mr. Greenberg, Mrs. Greenberg, Mr. Greenberg, Mrs. Greenberg. The truth of the matter is they did have pictures in the hold of all of us, because we got to take a special tour of the quarters where all the staff lives. And there is a part that has all of our pictures and all of our names. So that was really interesting. That was there. The other thing is there was nothing that they wouldn't do for you. So we went on a cruise where alcohol was included, but I didn't like the Chardonnay that was in the main dining room. I happened to go to the Italian restaurant, and they had a different Chardonnay there, which I liked much better. I'm a Chardonnay drinker. And I engaged with the maitre d' there, and I told him I didn't like the Chardonnay down there. And he sent 6 bottles of his Chardonnay down to the main dining room so that I went down there. After a while, the concierge would know that we were coming in when we would walk in, or not concierge, the wine steward would know we were in. If he'd see us, he knew what table we were headed to. And by the time I got there, he had brought a bottle of wine, a wine that I liked that day, and he would bring it to us. One of the questions we have is that we have enough time to see when you're only in port for 1 day. In most cases, we were there for 1 day, but not in every day. In a couple of places, we spent more than 1 day. In Cape Town, we were there for 3 days. So that was there. And in Melbourne, we were there for 2. And in Sydney, we were there for 2. I think there was somewhere else we were. Oh, yeah, in Monte Carlo, we were there for a couple of days. So Irene and I are, we're highlights people. So for us, we had plenty of time. You can take a tour, an individual tour, which you pay extra for or a premium for, so just one-on-one, so you can go see what you want. We did that a couple of times. In some cities, we toured entirely by ourselves. In Cape Town, since we had been to Cape Town before, we took very few organized tours. We were there for 3 days, but we spent 2 days doing what we wanted to do on our own, as we did in Sydney, because we had been to Sydney before. But we had enough time to do what we wanted to. There were some places that there was not enough time, and you wish you had more. Madagascar and Mozambique were 2 in particular for me. When I was a young boy, I collected stamps, and the most beautiful stamps back in that day were from Madagascar and Mozambique. And I thought, boy, that would be a dream if I could go there one day. I went to, got to go to Mozambique and Madagascar, and that was special. Hannah asked if we could put the map back up so people could see all of the places that we went. So that was the first slide, Sharon, if we could go back. Yeah. So again, we started in LA. We took 5 days almost to get to Hawaii. We did 2 ports in Hawaii. Then we went to Fanning Island, which was Kiribati. You don't ever really want to go to Fanning Island. There's nothing to see there other than it's interesting. Pago Pago, American Samoa. Latuka is Fiji. We went to Fiji. And then we went to New Zealand. I had not been to New Zealand before. But then we went to Sydney and Hobart, Adelaide, Kangaroo Island, Albany, Australia, Busselton, and then we ended up in Perth. Perth was a place in particular I wish we had had more time. Perth is a fascinating city, and we did not have enough time there, although we had a spectacular guide there who made the most of it for us. He had lived there for 25 years, but he was an import, and he was really interesting. Australia, even though I had been there before, I had never seen Australia like this. But then we took 7 days across the Indian Ocean to Port Louis, which is Mauritius. And we got to Mauritius right as the equivalent, they don't call them hurricanes there, whatever they call them, tsunami, not tsunami, no, it wasn't monsoon either. My wife's here prompting me. Whatever they call that on that side of the world. But we had just missed that. Then we went to Reunion, which is in the same basin. But then Madagascar and Mozambique. And right after we left, there was this hurricane that went through there and destroyed much of the area we had just left. And then we went to Maputo, which is Mozambique, Richards Bay, back into South Africa and Durban, Port Elizabeth, interesting, Cape Town, and then 2 places in Namibia. The place that really was not nice was Senegal. We went to Senegal, and I would tell you that was one of the places that was the only place we ever felt unsafe. That was the only place we ever felt unsafe there. St. Helena was beautiful. Ascension Island has only 800 inhabitants, and you have to have a passport, not a passport, you have to have a license from Britain to live there. It's the second longest airfield in the world. Second longest airfield in the world, only 800 people live there. And the reason for that is that was the emergency landing place for the shuttle when we ran shuttles. So it was shared between the Brits and the US, but we got weathered out of that place. I said, then we went to Dakar in Senegal. Port Novo was beautiful. Santa Cruz de Palma, into Spain, Barcelona, and ended up in Monte Carlo. It was quite the trip. Cyclone, thank you. That was the word. Somebody was listening. I appreciate that, cyclone. And typhoons. But it was an amazing experience. It was life-altering and life-changing. We had so much fun, so much education, so much culture, so much religion. It was really the experience of a lifetime, and it was life-altering because it taught me and Irene, it taught us about places and life as we couldn't possibly have understood it before. It made a major impact on us. When I talked to that young lady in Namibia who was going to the University of Pittsburgh on a full ride, she got a full ride. She was trying to raise some money for living expenses. She did pretty well off our bus, I'll tell you that, because we all heard the story, so we all went into our pockets. She did pretty good. There was, people asked me about tipping on board. There was no tipping on board per se. Didn't mean we didn't do it. So I took care of all of the wine stewards, which paid tremendous dividends, because we didn't have what we wanted as soon as we wanted it. And I took care of our cabin steward. She was great. That's another thing too that is underestimated. On a world cruise, you get to know all the crew differently than you would ordinarily on a week cruise. So the waiter that spent the most time with us was from India, but we met crew from well over 40 countries, maybe 50 or 60 countries. So you learn through there about their trying to raise their family on the money that they make on Crystal. And the Crystal crew, many of the crew on Crystal is there for 10, 15, 18, 20, 25, 30 years. They take care of their staff in an amazing fashion. And it keeps those staff keep coming back year after year after year. They work 5 months on, 2 months off. So it's not an easy lifestyle. But they do pretty well. They raise their families, a lot of them. One of the waiters in the Italian restaurant, his wife gave birth 2 weeks early, and so he missed the birth, but he couldn't wait to go. And we all bought him gifts for the baby so he could go home with some gifts. People from the Baltics, from the Ukraine. We met somebody from the Ukraine. they all have seen all parts of the world, and nobody has asked me this. None of them want to live in the United States. Not one of the staff ever said this is where they'd like to settle. We met somebody from Peru who was one of the wine stewards. He had a 40-acre farm in Peru and was building a 15,000 square foot house and a restaurant on there to do special meal preparation and special events. And I have no doubt that he's would have been very successful, although Peru's been hit hard by COVID. So no more questions? Nobody wants to ask me anything? Well,
We want to go through more slides?
sure. Did I have more slides there? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think so.
So here, here on the upper left are a bunch of kids in, I want to say Madagascar. They put on a show for us. To the right are the beaches of, they were in Spain. Churches. There's no shortage of churches everywhere you go. So the question was, how much does a basic cruise cost? A lot of money. But I will say that you can't do this for less than 6 figures. And you can spend more. I met a woman on there who had a suite by herself, and she spent over $250,000 on her suite. So I know that sounds like a lot of money, and it is not for everybody. But interestingly enough, one of the things that scared me, I'm glad whoever asked this asked it. It scared me if I was going to be amongst people who are much wealthier than I, and that did really concern me, because that's not my nature and not my style, and I'm not that rich. There were people like the chairman of Starbucks, who before that had been chairman of Macy's twice, chairman of JCPenney. He had 5 homes. But honestly, he was the most Hamish guy you'd ever meet. I mean, he was really a very down-to-earth guy who thought he was going to die at 29. He was diagnosed with ALS at 29. He was in his 70s now. He had been improperly diagnosed. But he appreciated every minute on earth. So most of the people I met were down-to-earth, normal people, some with a great deal of money, some not. The other thing is the world cruising community is somewhat cultish. So there were people on there who had been on their 7th, 8th, 10th, 12th, 15th world cruise. They all wear that with a badge of honor. So that's interesting. That's an interesting dichotomy as well. I would say most people were kind of pretty much like us. They had done okay. They had a nice life. They could afford it, but they couldn't afford anything they wanted, but they could afford this. I just got another question, which was, where will my 2022 trip go? So we leave from Miami. It will go to ports along the Panama Canal route to LA, but ports that I have never been to before and places I have not been. A couple of stops in Peru I haven't been to, and in Colombia that I have not been to. So we'll do that. Then it'll go to LA, and then from LA it will go across to Hawaii again. But then we go to Jamaica first, Nicaragua, Guatemala, some Mexico, up and down the Mexico coast. It will then go to Hawaii, and from there we'll go to the other Samoa. We went to American Samoa, but we'll go to the other different parts of New Zealand. It'll go to Auckland and Tauranga and Picton, so we'll spend more time there. We'll do Sydney again. It'll do Melbourne again, Adelaide, Busselton. That will be mostly a repeat, Perth. And then it will go to, I don't know where Exmouth is. Then we'll go to Bali, Singapore, Sri Lanka, the Maldives, India, Bombay, India. That's the only way I could ever get my wife to go to India is if we go on a cruise ship and take a helicopter to the Taj Mahal and back to the ship because she doesn't want to go there. We'll go to India. We'll go to Oman. Interestingly enough, I was in Oman a couple of years ago. It's a great place. We'll do Egypt as we go up through the Suez Canal. We'll do Safaga and Aqaba. We'll spend some time in Israel, Cyprus, Greece, Turkey, Bulgaria, Ukraine, Romania, back to Greece, Italy, Monaco, Spain, Gibraltar, Portugal, Bermuda, and back to Miami. So that's my 122 days. So we didn't think 85 days was too long. We thought it was a very long time. And in the beginning, we thought we were going to be away too long. But we were connected on our Wi-Fi. We talked regularly. Interestingly enough, I almost never called. Remember, I'm still working, but I never called because we were always almost on the opposite side of the 24-hour clock. So I did a lot of email, but I didn't do a lot of phone calls. I called the kids once on a video, FaceTime, but we didn't even do much of that. The thing is, while we were ready to leave when the ship was over, when the cruise was over, it wasn't as if I couldn't wait to get off the ship. If you go back to what I said before, each of the ports that we were going to were so fascinating. They were so interesting, things you'd never, if you grew up a poor kid in Queens like I did, if you never thought you'd get to see Madagascar and Mozambique, it didn't matter how long it took you to get there. You just couldn't wait to be there. And so virtually every place we went, we had a great time. We did have one problem. Irene fractured her knee in Sydney. And that put a little damper on some of our ability to do some of the things we wanted to do. But even there, the medical care on board, I'm surprised nobody asked me about medical care. Medical care on board was unbelievable. In fact, the doctor on board successfully diagnosed what happened to her immediately. They had an X-ray machine on board. This is not happy. 2 people died on board. Somebody dies every world cruise. It's not unusual. 3 people were not airlifted, but when we got to a port, were sent home because they were so sick. But medical care was good. And we went to some places where medical care, if you were in Sydney or Melbourne, the medical care was good. Cape Town, the medical care was good. If you were in Namibia, you waited till you got somewhere better. But there was that. But even on the ship, when Irene broke her knee, they couldn't have been more helpful. They brought me a wheelchair, gave us a cane, allowed us to get on the tour buses early, made sure that she was accommodated. And she only missed one tour that we had planned because they made it that easy. So that was really interesting for us. Anybody else? So on the bottom left there, that's the Russian oligarch's ship. And I put that next to the ship, to the scene on the right, because that was poverty, the likes of which you would have a very difficult time appreciating unless you could see it. Some of the scenery was really quite astounding. Some of the scenic places were magnificent. All right. Well, if there's no other questions, I don't know. Sharon, anything else? We good?
I think we're good. Let me just stop sharing and just see if anybody wants to raise their hand or anything. I'll unmute everybody and I can't, it doesn't allow me.
But
Anybody want to say anything more? Anybody have any questions?
Well, somebody volunteered to carry our bags. I will say I truly appreciate that. There is, however, a very long line for the next one. We've got a number of people who have volunteered for us to adopt them. So I hope you enjoyed it. It's nice talking about this. I'm a little tired of talking about all the bad news. So I appreciate you all listening and sticking with this. You guys are terrific. I love talking to you. I want to wish you all the best. I hope you guys stay healthy. I hope you stay well. I hope you continue to support your synagogue. What can I say other than stay healthy and stay safe and be well?
Sharon,
Scott,
Yeah.
Wendy has a question.
Okay.
yeah. I just want to comment at how fascinating this was. I
Thank
was sitting here trying to take notes because there was just too much to keep up with. When you say that I don't know when I would ever get that kind of money, obviously, if we go on a Caribbean cruise, you know, it ends up costing us $1,000. I don't know if, you know, the two of you are looking at 10,000 a week or it's higher than that.
No, I said it was about, so all in, it was about, and we had the cheapest cabin, well, not the cheapest, but close to the cheapest cabin. It cost us about $100,000. So for 12 weeks. So it's about $8,000 a week.
Oh, that's not as bad as I thought.
Yeah. And our 2022 cruise, believe it or not, is only about $5,000 or $10,000 more. The advantage for us, not for everybody, but the advantage for us on the 2022 cruise is that we're leaving from Miami. So it'll be Miami to Miami. I have no airfare. I had to add airfare in to go to LA and back from Monte Carlo, which added to our costs. But we won't have that on the Miami to Miami cruise. Crystal is also that year, 2022, they're doing 5 versions of the World Cruise, all the same cruise. We're going Miami to Miami, but some people are going to start in LA. Some people are going to end in Monte Carlo. Some people are going to end in Gibraltar, I think, or so they're giving you 5 options, anywhere from 88 days, I think, to 136 days. We're excited about that because we'll do both. I mean, I've done both canals, but we'll do both canals in the same year, which will be exciting. And while some of the ports are repeats in our travel lives, there's something different to see in each of these ports, and you get to meet you get to see the culture. But it was, I can't begin to tell you that we had great expectations. We entered this so anxious to go and with such anticipation, and it exceeded everything we ever thought it could be. It was better at every level. I didn't talk about this, but the food. So you could go on Crystal. Somebody just asked what wine it was. It was Crystal. I could go on Crystal. I would go down one Friday morning, and I'm not terribly religious, but one Friday morning I went down and I said, can I have a traditional Shabbos dinner tonight? They said, don't worry, Mr. Greenberg, we'll take care of it. We showed up for dinner. We had matzo ball soup, which was spectacular. I had chopped liver. Now, I got to be honest with you. My wife makes the best chopped liver in the history of the world. This chopped liver was as close to hers as you could get. I had a half a kosher chicken. I had potato latkes, all right, and a vegetable. I forget what it was. And we had apple pie or apple some a la mode for dessert. One night I was dying for fried chicken. I went down in the early afternoon. I said, can I have fried chicken tonight? And their answer was white meat or dark. I mean, they would do anything for you that you wanted to do.
Well, you say it's I never heard of Crystal.
Crystal is, well, they say it's a 6-star line. I don't know what that means.
What is Holland America? Because I thought that was considered high end.
I would say Holland America is probably 4 stars, 3 or 4 stars.
Oh.
Seabourn is right up there. There's a couple of others. You can look up Crystal online. Crystal is they're amazing. They're doing a lot of river cruises now. They started a new river cruise segment, but they only have 2 ships. They're introducing a 3rd ship next year. They only have 2 ships. The Serenity and the Symphony. Irene and I had been on the Symphony before twice, but never on Serenity. It was not a new ship. It's 25 years old. It had just come out of dry dock. I didn't mention that either. It had just come out of dry dock 2 weeks before we got on. So almost everything on the ship had just been redone. So that was really nice. It was pretty brand new, even though it was 25 years old. You know, if I would go up to the Italian restaurant and I would ask for something special that wasn't on the menu. I don't know what it was. They didn't have chicken parmesan on the menu. one night I was craving chicken parmesan. I went up, I said, "I have chicken parmesan." And it was out. I mean, there's nothing they wouldn't do for you.
Yeah.
So you felt unbelievably special. They they took care of every whim you could ask for, and it was not filled with a bunch of pompous, spoiled people. You have to be honest. I mean, most of us were in shorts all day or gym wear, sweats to watch the movies and eat the popcorn. Very little complaining, although of course there was a rabbi on board, there was a priest on board. We went to services once or twice. That was fun. I don't go to services here, but I did there. The rabbi was nice. It was wonderful. It was just wonderful. It was great. Yeah. It definitely spoiled us, I will tell you that. Royal Caribbean, we went on a Royal Caribbean ship after that, and while it was very good for what it was, it's not exactly crystal.
Right, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was great.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you
Thank
very much for all of the people that attended today. Thank you, Scott, for sharing with us.
Okay, one more question people ask. Were the
Okay.
specialty restaurants extra? No, they're included.
Wow.
Yeah.
So thank you, Scott. Thank you for giving us a little bit of entertainment today and making us wish that we could travel the world right now. And I thank everybody. Hope you're all well. Stay safe. Tomorrow night, our Shabbat service, you'll be able to see that anytime from the afternoon to the evening. And we'll have our own Egg Shabbat Zoom and Schmooze tomorrow night at 8:30. Hope to see you all there. Virtual hugs and kisses. Thank you from L'Dor Va-Dor.
Good night.
Good night.